So, welcome to everybody. Welcome to the second to last seminar for this academic term, because we will continue next year of the permanent seminar series, Faces and Traces of Violence. We are delighted to have here Natan Sznaider, who traveled all the way from Tel Aviv yesterday, and will stay with us until
Sunday morning.
I hope you were going to stay until the end of the European Cup, but well, with this seminar we also inaugurate the full-length recording of the seminars. Because now, as you know, there's a new YouTube channel in the center, so we'll kind of add these to all the sessions to the files. It will be also uploaded in our webpage later. So. Natan Sznaider was born in Germany and educated in Israel and the United States. He was saying, like a failed soccer player and a sociologist by default. Yes. in Tel Aviv and in Israel. He has also been guest professor in Munich, Vienna and New York. He lived 9 years in New York. Mm-hmm. And his major research interests are very well known in the area of memory and human rights, in terms of also the Holocaust, trauma, and theories of cosmopolitanism, which is where he has done a lot of collaborations also with German sociologist Ulrich Beck in the last few years on cosmopolitanism and globalization. Just to mention some of his important publications, which are like basic for anybody who is working on memory studies in contemporary academia. In the year 2000, The Compassionate Temperament, Care and Cruelty in Modern Society. What a title! I haven't read this one, but looks really interesting. The Holocaust and Memory in the Global Age with Daniel Levy, with his collaboration with Daniel Levy. Human Rights and Memory in 2010, and now you have in press another book, Jewish Memory and Cosmopolitan. Oh, it's already out. We have here at in press. Okay, super. So,
and it will come out in Spanish as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
next year, I guess it's like Edición Capital Intelectual, Buenos Aires.
Buenos Aires. Okay.
Buenos Aires. Yes, they picked it up.
The name of the press is press.
Capital Intelectual. Yes.
Oh my God. Scary.
Never heard about it.
So, well, of course, he has a lot of very influential papers written in major journals, and some of them, are available online, and in his webpage also, his institutional webpage, you can download them. So today we are really curious, because he'll be talking about how all of these issues he has been working on in the last years play out in Spain. Mm. What does Spain mean in the global context?
Okay, so, I'll try, yes.
Yeah, we're looking forward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you so much for having me here and inviting me. I really love coming to Spain and to Madrid. And I want to start my talk with a disclaimer. It's always good to start with a disclaimer. I'm talking here as an outsider. I read Spanish only very rudimentary. I'm not able to follow the internal debates in Spain from the inside. That's what I have to offer, is the perspective of an outsider who writes and speaks and thinks in either English, German, or Hebrew. The best I can hope for is to add some insights into the politics of forgetting and remembering of the last few decades, which may have escaped those who look at Spanish politics from within. For sometimes what one sees from afar cannot be noticed when one stands close by. Thus, being an amateur in internal Spanish affairs and not wanting to be actively a part of either side of the Spanish memory debates, I have picked up some books and articles, most of them in English, dealing with Spanish memory and the mass graves and the recovery of historical memory. One of them being, of course, Unearthing Franco's Legacy, where an article of Paco is in there as well, edited by Carlos Jerez-Farén and Samuel Amago. And what I have read in this volume and in other volumes is that there seems to be more or less a major agreement on the outlines of the Spanish memory politics. They all talk about a conspiracy of silence, some sort of national amnesia. This in turn is being talked about as an impediment for the process of democratization in Spain. They talk about peace, but they also talk about the lack of justice. Now, looking at Spain from the outside, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know here, the point of silence and forgetting is more often than not emphasized. And this emphasis has to do, of course, with democracy and transitional justice. For outsiders, this is especially interesting since the Spanish Civil War was one of the most important icons of the 20th century politics, even before people knew how to relate to the politics of memory of the Holocaust. But when you look at the law of historical memory from here in Spain of 2007, it seems that at least that Spain in some sort has joined a European tendency which is connected to the moral imperative of memory, even though the European memory debates have run a different course. But have they really? In the post-war period, following the end of World War II, the confrontation between fascism and anti-fascism was central in the way the war was conceived and remembered. And here, of course, the memory of the Spanish Civil War, especially the memory of the defeated, played a large role. However, in the later years and in the last decades, it is the Holocaust and the concept of genocide which has taken center stage in European memory politics. And this may be one of the reasons why, for instance, I think why we have a new book on the Spanish Civil War, just came out in England and it came out a little bit earlier in Spain, which is called The Spanish Holocaust by Preston. Preston also has a chapter in the above mentioned, in the book, which is also appearing in the Unearthing Franco's Legacy volume called Theorist of Extermination, which I found very impressive in the direction it tries to take. Are we supposed to think that what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust is similar or even the same as what happened to the victims of Franco? For me, who is not an expert on Spanish history, but have written more extensively on Jewish memory and the Holocaust, this was a rather fascinating point of entry. I wondered what the term extermination really meant in this context. Extermination in German and in English is a very loaded concept. I don't know if the same connotation is given when you think about that concept, exterminación in Spanish, if you think about this concept in Spanish. But in German, Vernichtung, or in English, extermination, the term has very specific meanings, means the war of extermination in Eastern Europe against the Jews, and I think that Preston really tries to bring these two events closer to each other, maybe too close in my taste, I would say. I think that one always has to try to take into account Hannah Arendt's insights when she wrote about the Nuremberg trials, and in one of the letters to her dissertation advisor, Jaspers, she wrote in 1946 that just as the guilt of the perpetrators shattered the limits of legal judgment, the total innocence of the victims in light of the gas chambers transcended the limits of human morality. And I wonder if that is true for the victims of the Franco regime as well. I think that even if I don't want to answer that question in a clear-cut way, I think it's at least a question worthwhile pondering about. I remember reading books by Jorge Semprún, who constantly drew the distinctions in his books, articles, interviews, when he talked about the experiences of the Spanish resistance fighters as compared to the Jewish existence in the camp. He has a conversation with Elie Wiesel, which was published in Spanish as well, where he talks about the incommensurability between Jewish prisoners in the small camp and political prisoners in the main camp in Buchenwald, and he talks about also the Spanish prisoners in Mauthausen. Clearly, Semprún and Preston talk about different things. Preston refers to the killing fields of Stein, while Semprún talks about Spanish prisoners in Buchenwald and in Mauthausen. But there seems to be a semantic container which now tries to turn everybody into a Jewish victim, which also means automatically that victimhood becomes depoliticized. I think this might have major implications in the current politics of memory. Spain was not really part of World War II and might therefore be disconnected from what is considered post-war. Clearly, the memory of the Holocaust plays a large role in Europe's self-understanding today. It unites Europe in two ways. It unites it from within as the crime that Germany has committed, but also that Europe has committed. Europe suffered, and that Europe must expiate. And it unites it also from without, against the only common enemy that isn't another country, against the negation of civilization, in short, against all those who commit crimes against humanity. And this is also connected, of course, to the theories, the social theories, which try to explain the Holocaust, which are connected, if it's a particular crime, a universal crime, and all these things that I don't have to get into at the moment. If there's one thing the EU does, it is building new structures, and this is not only connected to the euro, and I mean also the currency, and not only the soccer fields, but it's building new structures. But most of all, what concerns us most here is that the idea, the cultural underpinning of the EU, that with globalization, there's this thinking that globalization eradicates historical memory, but this is clearly false. The Holocaust is not just a collective memory. It has become a global collective memory. It was created out of national memories in the same way that the EU was created out of nation states. But in a similar manner, it has become independent of those national memories without shedding them completely, and it has to begun to exert a shaping force upon them. It has the same relation to the EU as national collective memories have to nation states. It provides a collective identity, a we-they relation in which all members of the polity can participate to become part of the we. It is the natural accompaniment of the constitution of a new collectivity. Now, it would be interesting to ask what that means for Spain and for the legacy of the Civil War. Unlike Greece, for example, there was no German occupation in Spain. The Holocaust was not really an event in Spanish history during those days. Just the opposite. Spain was the territory that Jews moved through on their way from France to Lisbon to catch a boat to America. Of course, the most famous person maybe doing that path was Hannah Arendt, who moved through Spain on her way to Lisbon, and of course the famous story of Walter Benjamin's suicide in Port-Bou. So Spain has, in historical terms for the Holocaust, is really not a killing field. It's just the opposite. It's a crossing path on the way to America. So what it means, therefore, that means that the post-war Holocaust relation, if you look at Tony Judd's book that maybe some of you have read, called Post-War, and how Holocaust memory is related to post-war Europe, Spain is really lying on the outskirts. It's really not part of that process in many ways. But what does it mean for Spanish memory politics and for European politics today? I mean, for the Holocaust, it took decades from this phenomenon to develop into its present form. The Holocaust began to be publicly remembered decades after the reality itself had passed. It did not in any way spring naturally from these events. And it's curious and interesting how it came to public prominence in many Western countries at about the same time, but it originally emerged in each of them for very different reasons, in very different national contexts, and had very different meanings. And one important point here is that this worldwide memorialization of the Holocaust has led to the demand for restitution also in the form of money. And I'll talk about the politics of restitution a little bit later on. The memory of the Holocaust can now be a unifying and transformative, has now unifying and transformative power. The recent international reactions against ethnic cleansing and violations of human rights represent a qualitative change in political values corresponding to a change in the structure of global politics. Now, while the sovereignty of states remains intact, their autonomy to determine the scope of solidarities in purely national terms has been progressively diminished. And that has produced the space and the need for the emergence of new transnational solidarities. And the deterritorialized memory of the Holocaust has filled partly this need. Again, I ask myself, how does this make sense for the Spanish context? Does it make sense for the Spanish context at all? And I think it does. And I think that concepts like the Spanish Holocaust and extermination can maybe be explained around these new trends. It seems to me that especially here in Spain, this new tendency of trying to integrate Holocaust memory into national memory structures, which were less touched by the Holocaust, takes on a very special form. In Spanish politics, again, and I talk here as a complete amateur, and I beg your forgiveness if you think I'm talking complete nonsense, but I think that in Spanish politics, amnesty and amnesia played rather explicit roles in the transition to democracy. That is at least what the literature tells us. Forgiveness, like forgetting in this context, means a new beginning, a capacity not to be determined by the past. This has become part of a universal norm in which the forgiver and the forgiven are expected to reconcile past evils for the sake of a shared future. We encounter a dilemma when forgiveness and forgetting on the personal level and forgiveness and forgetting on the collective level are fused in a human rights rhetoric commanding reconciliation. These are two levels not always possible to be reconciled. We all seem to agree that there's a duty to remember, but can there also be a duty to forget, as Paul Ricoeur in one of his books is asking us. Thus the question I want to ask, and I want to lead through the rest of my paper, is the question if the taking of responsibility for committed crimes in the past, does it really stabilize democracy in the future? Is that really true? Or is this just like a mantra that a lot of people are claiming, that taking responsibility for committed crimes in the past stabilizes democracy in the future? How can we know that memory really causes humanness? I'm not saying it does not, but it seems to me that in the current politics of memory, a lot of questions are not asked anymore. It seems to be taken for granted that memory is superior to non-memory, to forgetting, that it leads to more human behavior, that it leads even to salvation in a secular sense, and that it leads to the stabilization of democracy. I'm not saying it does not. I'm just saying that I think that as sociologists, as historians, or as philosophers, we should take one step back and ask again the question if it's really true and under what circumstances it is true or not. Now, you know better than anyone else that with the passage of time, important distinctions between the memories of perpetrators and victims are supposed to fade. Memories are passed on to observers and transmitted through media channels that are shaped by human rights tropes. This fusing of perspectives makes the act of reconciliation a key experience of memory. It is not so much the original crimes that are on the agenda. The passage of time removes the actual victims and perpetrators, and they are no longer the actors. Rather, it is how their descendants deal with these histories and memories. What remains is the memory of a common history that cannot be shared, that cannot be divided, which is of course a problematic notion, since divided history is exactly what caused the committed injustices in the first place. Thus, and again, one needs of course to draw a distinction between the politics of memory right after 1975 and events starting in 2000 or after 2000. Political forgiveness and human rights share a common assumption of absoluteness and even sanctity. They also share a break with the past, a new beginning. The act of forgiveness refers to joint acts of exercising freedom by breaking loose from the past. And you constantly have the debates, and not only in Spain, asking if forgiveness, forgetting, is a morally superior act, and the spirit of forgiveness, forgetting, a morally superior sentiment. Resentment, the refusal to forgive, is considered by some atavistic and archaic, and supposedly leads to revenge and renewed cycles of violence. Even though connected, this is not paralleled by memory and forgetting. By contrast, uttering the truth about historical injustices and making the gesture together with the former enemy is considered liberating. This is, of course, a big point in the debates in South Africa regarding the truth commissions. And truth commissions in particular are said to have these redemptive qualities, and as such are part of other reconciliatory acts. In this sense, history and politics have been turned very often into trauma laboratories that probe whether forgiveness, given state-sponsored mass atrocities, and other extreme human rights abuses can be granted in meaningful ways, both personally and collectively. And I'm sure that those of you who know the literature about trauma and politics have noticed how the language of politics has become increasingly psychologized through the trope of trauma and the traumatized victim. The traumatized victim, the innocent victim, the depoliticized victim, and all that. There may be no way of determining what constitutes the correct relationship between memories and forgetting, or between punishment, revenge, and forgiveness. But as a framework of global normative expectations, the politics of forgiveness not only dominates contexts of transitional justice and other cases of conflict resolution, but also shuns those who do not want to forgive, who demand and insist on their right to resentment and retribution. Again, one wonders if Spain has taken a different route here, or if it tries to somehow find its way into the European politics of memory. Forgiveness constitutes the implied and often explicit background for issues of restitution, the politics of memory, and other reactions to the public outing of historical injustices. It confronts us with difficult questions. Should we privilege memory over forgetting? Punishment over amnesty? Resentment over forgiveness? Should forgiveness privilege former victims or absolve the perpetrators? These and other questions triggered a rich literature in the aftermath of the Holocaust, especially in the process of democratization of Western Germany in the late 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Global awareness emerged in the context also of post-apartheid South Africa, with the seminal influence of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It received renewed attention again against the global backdrop of the Balkan conflicts during the 90s, and of course regional manifestations of traditional justice such as the Argentinian Dirty War and other Latin American cases, as well as the Eastern and Central European post-communist societies. And in this context, one can also mention the clues that Spanish memory movement takes, I think, from the Argentinian movement of coming to terms with the past, and how these tropes relate to the desaparecido category. Thus, Spain is certainly not alone with these questions, but has to maneuver around with Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Latin America, and all that. Back to Arendt and theory. There are different perceptions of forgiveness, but all presume to have the alleged power to undo what has been done, that is, in words of Hannah Arendt, the possible redemption from the predicament of irreversibility as she wrote in the late 50s in her book, The Human Condition. It implies freedom of political action, the ability to liberate oneself from the prison of time, to be born anew in politics. As Arendt observes, the opposite of forgiveness is vengeance. And vengeance can be predicted since it runs its due course in which people act as they are supposed to act, and the past determines the present and the future. Forgiveness, on the other hand, is unpredictable. It is undetermined action. Hence, in Arendtian terms, it is true political action and an expression of political liberty. That's what she thinks. For her, the alternative is punishment and trials, and Arendt briefly explores this avenue when she writes that, and I quote, "Men are unable to forgive what they cannot punish, and they are unable to punish what has turned out to be unforgivable." Arendt clearly, if you look at The Human Condition, what she meant when she wrote about acts that cannot be punished and acts that are not punishable because they are not forgivable, Arendt clearly means the Holocaust. For our purpose, that means that when you start understanding political conflicts in terms of the Holocaust, and I think this is a tendency that I've seen in Spanish memory politics. Maybe it's my sensitivity that has paid attention to it. Maybe it's much weaker than in a reality than I suppose than I think it might be. But if you understand political conflicts in terms of the Holocaust, and I've just read an article, for instance, about Argentina, where the victims of the Argentinian wars are described as los judíos del sur, and they're described in terms of Holocaust victims. I've read an article in the paper lately about Spanish prisoners of Mauthausen who are framing, whose experiences are being framed within the context of Holocaust victimhood. That means that when you start understanding political conflicts in terms of the Holocaust, the questions of political forgiveness and what can be called restorative forgetting really do not make any sense, because the conflict is not understood anymore in political terms. For Arendt, this is clearly a difference. She always tries to make the distinction between politics and the politics of memory and Holocaust memory, which she takes outside from that frame. In terms of politics, she argues, we do not want to be prisoners of the past because only our radical openness to the future makes political action possible. Thus, political forgiveness is one possible form of leverage. Arendt recognized the charismatic origins of forgiveness in salvation, but re-evaluated it such that forgiveness was to be based not on Christian love, but on Greek respect and politics. In this way, she attempted theoretically to void the concept of its religious content, because forgiveness is basically understood very often in religious terms, and replace it with a political one, political forgiveness. And in that political sphere, that means for some authors who have written on Germany, who have analyzed, for instance, what has happened in Germany in the 1950s as transformative silence, that's a concept of Aleida Assmann. Communicative silence, that's a concept of Hermann Löbbe. And both of them, Aleida Assmann and Hermann Löbbe, have looked at what made it possible that former Nazi Germany could transform within a decade into a Western liberal, or more or less liberal, democratic political entity, and saw that what is called transformative silence, communicative silence, or what Jay Winter called political silence, as a necessary precondition for renewal after periods of dictatorship or war, and often results of political compromise where nobody is truly satisfied. Arendt qualified her view of forgiveness, however, by linking it to the judicial and the political. Again, deeds that are not punishable cannot be forgiven. And that's what she calls radical evil. Arendt's term for the Holocaust is thus excluded from the politics of political forgiveness. Perpetrator and victim need to share a common ground, to be at home in the world, as she put it. This plurality makes politics possible. For her, the Holocaust, radical evil, has destroyed plurality and therefore politics, because former victims and perpetrators have ceased to share the same world. And now the question that needs to be asked, if this is true for political cases like Eastern Europe, South Africa, or Spain the same. Do have former victims and perpetrators, have they ceased to share the same world, or can they share the same world? Following Arendt's line of thought thus poses a huge conceptual problem for theorists and activists of reconciliation, and by extension for human rights. And I think it's a big question here in the Spanish context, since thinking about the victims in the Spanish context as Holocaust victims clearly opens new conceptual doors while closing others at the same time. And one has to be aware which doors are being opened and which doors are being closed. Now, let me come to sort of like a midterm summary, and before I continue, I want to ask again the questions that have led my thinking for this presentation. What exactly does the centrality of memory mean for justice? Maybe it might be better to let go of the past, and maybe forgetting is indeed an antidote to too much memory. And I'm saying, I'm playing here devil's advocate. I'm not here trying to I mean, I've written so many books on articles on memory that all of a sudden I'm not taking a position. I'm tired of memory, now I want to start doing forgetting, sort of. That's not the point. But I've caught myself after years of thinking and writing about these issues that maybe really have people who are working in the field of memory sort of like have really stopped asking these questions, and that I want to only take a step back and ask questions and see how forgetting, memory, justice, in what kind of uncertain and perplexing relationship they stand. Clearly, to do justice is to remember, to preserve and guard in memory the injury, the victim, and the perpetrator. This canon should not be denied. Yet, peace and a life in common, the foundation of a civic community, make their claims on us, of which is that we allow the forgetting of past evils. The issue of forgetting, forgiveness, takes on different meanings when situated in the context of state practices. Despite, or perhaps because of it, the pervasive trend of, for instance, public apologies and forms of national introspection. Poland is a very wonderful example for that. What happened after Jan Tomasz Gross, I don't know, has his books been translated into Spanish? I'm not sure. Neighbors and Fear, and the way that the debate he has caused. He's like a former Polish Jew whose parents were expelled from Poland in '68, and he works now out of Princeton, and he has written about Polish anti-Semitism, which is unconnected to Nazi anti-Semitism, and he has written about the programs against Jews after 1945 in Poland. One book and another book, which is called Neighbors, which has to do with a massacre that Polish neighbors perpetrated against their Jewish neighbors in a village called Jedwabne. And his books, which were written in English, translated into Polish, steered a huge debate in Poland about the past and what it meant to be at the same time a victim of Nazism, but a perpetrator against the Jews, and how it divided up Polish and Jewish memory. Really a great example for the things we're talking about. And in way, we had the Polish president at the time publicly apologize for the crimes that Polish citizens in Jedwabne had committed against their Jewish neighbors. And it was a very moving ceremony when the Polish president apologized. So we have a trend of public apologies, national introspection, which need to differentiate between political circumstances in which these practices take place. Also, the relative success of restitution measures depends considerably on specific regime constellation. In particular countries, notably the post-communist cases, under conditions of transitional justice and faced with the daunting task of becoming stable democracies, frequently needed to strike a balance between the search for justice and the need for civil and political stability. And I think the best example probably is post-war Germany. And this example underscores how little effect, for instance, official restitution attempts had, and we're talking 1951, 1952, 7 years after the end of World War II, and Germany started paying out restitution, but on the other hand, it didn't prevent former Nazis from playing a huge part in rebuilding the country, and rebuilding the country in a democratic, in a democratic way. There's this wonderful story about the Bavarian mayor greeting the American officer entering his village in southern Bavaria. He was greeting him when the American officer entered the village and said, "Officer, we are now strictly democratic." And it's a joke, but it's also a very realistic joke, because this is exactly what has happened to Western Germany. But it was only later, during the late 60s, when successful reconstruction and political stability were achieved, that the pervasive failure to punish former Nazis became unacceptable in West German societies. But it took 20 to 25 years until this has happened. It took another 2 decades before the historical spotlight focused directly on the deeds of the perpetrators, as opposed to the routinized official ritual of mourning its victims. And this delayed time frame is of course important for other countries going through periods of transitional justice. Thus, what might have been exactly the right path to take in 1975, 1980, 1985 might actually change when it comes to 2010, 2020, and so forth. Thus, the question shifts from a quest for absolute justice to one in which states look for the best outcome possible at a given time and in light of available resources. And best can be assessed only against the available alternatives, and not in terms of how far they fall short of ultimate goals such as human rights or justice. At issue is the fact that there is no internal contradiction between humanitarian goals and the principles of realpolitik, but there can be between human rights and realpolitik. The two may be at odds, since human rights are an absolutist framework whose principles admit no compromise. This framework provides a set of standards against which all governments can be measured and against which all will fall short. Arguably, this is appropriate and effective in its proper context, but it may be inappropriate in the context of providing peace and stability. This may be one of the fundamental reasons, and think again about Germany after the war, why successor governments, and think about Poland, think about the Czech Republic, think about Spain, of course, why successor governments must always be formed out of at least some pre-existing element. The basic strategy will almost be to back some safe candidates, make acceptable compromises with others, and arrest and exclude entirely a small minority who make compromise impossible. And this last group must by definition be small, or the operation cannot possibly be accomplished in a limited period of time. Thus, at times, amnesties appears to be the right political choice. Thus, the de facto amnesty granted to Nazi officials after the war cannot be possibly squared with the demands of justice. And it loomed large during these processes. Nevertheless, amnesty remains colored by these local issues. Adam Michnik and his fellow activists who engendered the transformation in Poland operated under the slogan, "Amnesty yes, amnesia no." Debates about the acceptable balance between memory and prosecution are ultimately shaped by the requirements of social and political stability. Amnesties will always contain groups and members of the former regime who are seriously compromised in human rights terms. This is also, however, where forgiveness as a political principle may come in. A human rights framework that knows no compromise, or that sees any trade-off as a damnable delusion of its principles, is completely unsuited to applying such a strategy. This is especially important in ethnic struggles all over the globe today, and is why in political terms the human rights regime has to adjust to political expediencies if it is to be effective, even if this is a paradoxical, even absurd demand, given that human rights came into existence exactly to counteract these kind of political compromises. Let me illustrate this by an example out of Greek tragedy. This is why we have the poster with Antigone out there, which seems to play a rather large role when considering the work of burying the dead, for instance. I want to talk a bit about Antigone and how she and her actions are remembered in our context. Specifically, I came to this because, for all kinds of reasons. I teach Antigone in my seminar on political justice, and I discovered that in the book Unearthing Franco's Legacy, there was an article which caught my attention. It is called The Weight of Memory and the Lightness of Oblivion, and is written by Juan Ramón Resina. He's very critical of the transition in Spain and thinks that this transition is suffering from an Antigona complex. Those of you who, for some reason, have forgotten for a second, Antigona by Sophocles is probably the most famous Greek tragedy. You all know it starts after the end of the Civil War. Creon, the new leader of Theban, wants to punish the bad person of the Civil War, which is Polynicus, and gives an order which refuses to bury his corpse against demands of the gods that the dead have to be buried no matter what. Antigona, the sister of Polynicus, refuses to obey Creon's order and is willing to die for the principle that her brother needs a proper burial. Now you can see that people who are dealing with the politics of memory here in Spain, how much this drama is playing out symbolically. It's unburying the dead, burying the dead, the end of the Civil War, and all that. So Resina calls what is going on in Spain, and he also thinks that the transition to democracy has been a complete failure. That's his thesis in The Weight of Memory and the Lightness of Oblivion, and that Spain is suffering from an Antigona complex. For Resina, Creon, who forbids the burial of Polynicus, is clearly the villain, while Antigona, defying his order, is the heroine of the play. Antigona's loyalty to the dead is the true noble act, and Resina identifies her defiance against Creon as a reenactment of the Spanish situation, where the Asociación para la Recuperación de la Memoria Histórica is playing the role of Antigona, while the post-Franco state of Spain's tradition takes on the role of Creon. But for me reading this, rereading Antigona through his eyes as a political text, there seems to be, in the light of what I've said before, that one should push maybe beyond the purported dichotomy between Creon and Antigona. Clearly, Creon is the tyrant, and we modern-day Democrats identify with Antigone. This is what Juan Ramón Resina has done. And like many tyrants, Creon appeals to peace, security, and loyalty to the city. However, if it would be that clear-cut, if Antigona would only be right and Creon only be wrong, Sophocles wouldn't have written this. This would not be tragedy. This would be cliché. This example, and Sophocles would not be concerned about. This example caught my attention, this because the drama is much more tragic than the interpretation of the drama. Again, I don't want to outplay memory against forgetting. This is not the purpose of this. That's also, I don't want to outplay Creon against Antigone. But one can look at Antigone as a symbol of radical democracy, but also one of religious piety, and also these things do not have to exclude each other. Clearly, she has more allegiance to the dead than to the living, and she prefers to die. All her conversations with her sister, with her fiancé, there are always conversations that she prefers death over life. And Resina is, of course, not alone in using Antigone as a major example in this respect. One could fill volumes about Antigone interpretations and justice. And I just want to tell you about one example out of Poland. I mean, Wajda's movie about Katyn, which is the classic Polish symbol of doing justice to the dead in a different context. If you remember, Katyn is that incident where the Russians were killing 10,000s of Polish officers and were blaming it on the Germans. And only it took a long, long time until the truth came out. And Wajda made a beautiful movie about, a Polish movie about the Katyn incident. And as you remember, the Russians were trying to apologize, and the Poles were flying over, and then the plane crashed, and all kinds of weird things happened. And when Russia and Poland played in the first stages of the European Cup, the Russian fans were like flying paper planes into the direction of the Polish spectators to mock basically that incident of Katyn 2, if you like. But back to the movie, Wajda sees a parallel here also, and he has this theater play putting on stage Antigone between the defiant Antigone and the woman of Poland who defied the Soviet authorities in honoring their dead husbands and telling the true stories of their death. There are countless other examples. Staging of Antigone in Buenos Aires, in part of remembering the dirty war, and I'm sure, I don't know that, but I'm sure that maybe here in Spain you had also all kinds of Antigone stagings, maybe in the theater, trying to connect these incidents. What is interesting, however, is that all those examples do not even mention a third person in the play, Haemon. Nobody knows about Haemon anymore. Creon's son and Antigone's fiancé. We should not forget that Sophocles builds his tragedy around the fact that neither Creon nor Antigone are willing to yield, to compromise, to listen to others. Both argue and act from a position of absolute justice, and the audience may or may not choose if your duty lies with the dead or with the living, with the laws of the land or the law or the laws of eternal or the eternal laws of the gods. But Haemon, who is Creon's son, who is Antigone's fiancé, is actually the only one in that play that talks about political prudence. And he tells his father, and I quote, "But for a man to learn, even a wise man, is nothing shameful, nor to learn to bend and give way. You see how, in the winter storms, the trees yield that save even their twigs, but those who oppose it are destroyed root and branch. Just so the captain who never slackens his sail once he stretch, it gets his boat turned and sails the rest with benches upside down. Rather yield your anger and let yourself change. Even though I'm young, a good idea might come from me. It would be best by far that man be born full of all the knowledge there is, but if it usually happens not to turn out that way, to learn from those who speak well is a good substitute." Here, political wisdom means yielding. This is what it means to become a citizen. To be a citizen is to yield. Haemon has disappeared in the sea of Antigone's interpretations. And maybe that's one of the sides in the end of the play, but I think in many ways that he's the true hero of that tragedy. But cautioning against the complexities of the demands imposed by human rights imperatives and the institutional requirements of transitional justice should not be construed as an argument against human rights trials as such. Much depends on local circumstances. Do states after transition grant amnesty and forgive political criminals in the name of peace and stability? Should we allow these decisions to be overturned by an international tribunal? And what is the difference between different moments in times in history? And this is quintessential a Hobbesian situation. And Hobbes is also very important here because he was also writing at the end of a civil war in England. And he also thought that civil peace is often more important than morality, and where it is often the only precondition that can make real morality possible, meaning civil peace. This is fundamentally the opposite of the human rights perspective, which basically assumes that civil peace can never be endangered by its activities, and that no amount of mobilization, polarization, and anathematization can ever bring about a complete breakdown of the state, but always only purified. The ultimate reality of this situation is the needs of peace, which means the realities of power. This is an argument in favor of flexible principles, whose sense is to find the best solution given the constraints of the situation and the likelihood at any point of making things worse or less durable. These principles are designed to lead to the best compromise. They are right principles to guide choices, even when trying to reach the humanitarian goal of creating a society in which people live better, safer, freer, less fearful lives. These concerns involve weighting the benefits of remembering and acting upon past human rights abuses against the cost that such memories could incur for human rights violation in the future. Almost done. As such, the principles of restitution and forgiveness are primarily about negotiated history, in which various groups linked across national boundaries and cleavages seek to overcome a conflict in which a quest for common narrative. By doing so, they also change their own identity and to a certain extent and create a new opportunities for political action. Only forgiveness, Hannah Arendt argued, and I repeat myself a bit, can liberate political action from the paralyzing consequences of its own entanglements and open up new horizons for action. But here too a word of caution is advised. A common narrative is not common in the sense that both sides tell the same story. Instead, the recognition of different narratives is what establishes the commonality. Restitution and forgiveness need not inevitably lead to a shared narrative of erstwhile victims and perpetrators, but they acknowledge that politics may accept irreconcilable plurality as a given. This is also one of the things that one can learn from the German politics of restitution to Holocaust victims. That doesn't mean that there's a shared narrative between victims and perpetrators. Not at all. The issue is not communicative history. We're not playing here an Habermasian game. It's not a discourse ethics, but memories of historical conflicts in which irreconcilable viewpoints are brought closer together through the emergence of a global one vantage point of human rights that involves a third party, namely humanity as witness and bystanders. Now, if I looked a little bit at the Spanish law of history from 2007, and I found there some lines about reparations, and since I couldn't find an English translation of it, I was like looking at it in Spanish, and what I meant is this Artículo 4, Declaración de Reparación y Reconocimiento Personal. And there's this one passage that caught my attention, and please excuse my pronunciation. Se reconoce el derecho a obtener una declaración de reparación y reconocimiento personal a quienes durante la guerra civil y la dictadura padecieron los efectos de las resoluciones a que se refieren los artículos anteriores. This has really caught my attention, this paragraph. Of course it's symbolic, but the stress of the symbolic, in my opinion, one has to really look at this symbolic value of such statements. I believe that restitution and reparations play a rather important role in global politics today, even if they are symbolically only. Thus, as I understand it, the point here is about symbolic restitution and not money compensation on a grand scale. And I also understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, that large parts of the 2007 law are about symbolism, like removing of Frankish symbols, but it's the kind of symbolism which reformulates politics in the long run. Again, if I'm wrong, tell me. And this is even the price of this process is, and even if the price of this is the individualization of memory. Maybe it's actually not such a bad thing that the law of 2007 refuses to oppose a common memory on all. Again, the law might be more about peace than about justice, a law in the spirit of Haemon and not in the spirit of Creon or Antigone. Not an ideal situation, but maybe a livable one. And I know this is very problematic, and I followed the debates and difficulties and shortcomings, as in the case of Judge Garçon, which happened lately, and all that. But as Marcel Mauss, the great anthropologist, laid out already in 1925, in his analysis of the gift, symbolic exchanges are relations between people as much or more than they are relations between objects. In the case of symbolic restitution, the acceptance of that restitution symbolized the acceptance of the giver. And that is an acceptance that would never be possible on the basis of personal relationships. Who can forgive the murderer of his grandparents? This is very clear. This, on a personal level, forgiveness is not possible. But as a relation of states, of collective, it happens all the time. Every war in history has been eventually followed by a peace. And when you take payments and money payments, they perform the following function. They furnish the whole operation with the patina of banal everydayness. In the end, reparations are paid out like insurance, like an insurance against evil, as if national barriers did not exist. And they are mostly paid to people who never fought for them, simply because they deserved them. This is precisely the image of what a just and peaceful world would look like. The transformation of horrible ethnic and political wars into mundane peace is exactly the moral alchemy that restitution is supposed to accomplish. It is the transformation of the strong but opposed and divisive collective passions of ethnic and nationalistic war into the weak but numerous and uniting forces of, if you like, a cosmopolitan peace. Thus, collective memory will stay a battlefield. And in the end, this is a good thing. There are constantly new questions which define the field of memory and of European integration. Memory is, of course, agonistic. It never speaks universal truth. And this needs to be acknowledged by all sides of the politics of memory. Thus, instead of trying to make secure that which cannot be secured, we should rather allow to fight its corner among the various conflicting memories, which would provide us not with security, but with a vibrant public sphere of agonist and plural memories. That would be a definite step forward. Let me end by emphasizing again that I try to provide a view from the outside and might not be aware of all the fine lines that are going on in the politics of memory here, and I'm happy to hear more about it in our discussion. And I hope, of course, that you will, in the spirit of my paper, that you will forgive me and then forget all the nonsense that I have talked about. But at the end of my presentation, I will provide you with a poem by the Polish poet Wisława Szymborska, who just passed away recently, who lived through the Nazi occupation and then the Stalinist period of Poland and then the post-Stalinist Poland. It is called The End, the Beginning. After every war, someone has to clean up. Things won't straighten themselves up, after all. Someone has to push the rubble to the sides of the road so the corpse-laden wagons can pass. Someone has to get mired in scum and ashes, sofa sprigs, splintered glass, and bloody rags. Someone must drag in a girder to prop up a wall. Someone must glaze a window, rehang a door. Photogenic it's not, and takes years. All the cameras have left for another war. Again, we'll need bridges, a new railway station. Sleeves will go ragged from rolling them up. Someone, broom in hand, still recalls how it was. Someone listens and nods with unsevered head. Yet others, milling about, already find it dull. From behind the bush,
I think we would need like half an hour just to put ourselves back together after we've heard. I don't know who wants to start, who is the fastest, just to try to engage at least parts, of what Natan has been trying to say here. We can go into a more general debate. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for your talk. And I have got too many questions, but I think it is impossible to talk about all the questions. But I can say some of them. Well, first of all, I would want to ask you about the German case, about Germany.
German case.
Germany, yeah, about the German case. And it is a very concrete question. What do you think about the book of Margaret and Alexander Mitsovic, Die Unfähigkeit zu trauen? Because for me it was a very important book in the 70s. It was also translated into Spanish. And well, I wrote a chapter of a book in homage to the Mitsovic a long time ago about the Spanish Unfähigkeit zu trauen. So, and in the last 20 years, it is completely forgotten. There is
the book,
the book, and yeah, and I think it was a very good interpretation of the German case in the 60s and probably in the 70s, but it is forgotten. Yeah, and then the other question. Well, there are so many, as I said, but well. To begin with the Holocaust, well, I don't think that the Spanish case is a Holocaust. It's a completely different thing. I would say that the difference between the Holocaust in Germany and in other countries in Europe and the so-called Holocaust in Spain is completely different. Why? Well, there was a systematization of killing in the Holocaust, and also an industry of crime in the Holocaust that there was not in Spain. And well, it was terrible, the Spanish case, obviously. But from my point of view, it was not a Holocaust. It was not there was not an organization of criminality in great scale. There was criminality, of course, but we lack of the capacity of the transportation, for example, as the trains were functioning in Germany. Our bureaucracy was not so efficient as German bureaucracy. Well, if you pay a visit to Auschwitz and for one side, and you pay a visit to Valle de los Caídos, for example, or to a concentration camp in Spain, you can realize the difference between both situations. Well, I mean, our situation was very tragic, but I would say that it was not a Holocaust in the sense of a Jewish Holocaust. It's completely different. Well, it's completely different. There is a difference of scale, and this is also very important from a conceptual point of view. Yeah, and but about the symbolic restitution and about the symbols, I think this is very important what you say about your lecture or Article 4 in the Spanish law of historical memory. And well, I am working since some years on political iconography and on political metaphors and about political symbolism. But in the case of Spain, well, the symbolic restitution is very important, but what people are asking for is not only symbolic restitution, but also a real restitution. And in the case of Spain, well, it is the most important restitution, the real restitution is the restitution of the remains of the people, of the grandfather, grandmother. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the problems that we haven't, that we have today, because this restitution is not paid by the law. And we mean, or many people mean, that it would be a very good difference if the discovering of the giving of the remains to the families will be paid by the state. But there are also many other symbols that you can see nowadays in Spain, in Madrid, for example. Well, there is no sculpture of the dictator, but probably it's my problem, because I grew up and I saw when I was a kid, just 9 or 10 years old, how the Arch of Victory was built. And I would want, just before ending my life, how this Arch of Victory will be dismantled. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if I will see it, probably not, under these circumstances.
Okay,
should I directly respond, or should we collect?
Maybe we can collect some other questions, because, for example, I had something to say also regarding the law of historical memory, which you seem to be looking at the good side of it, but the problems come particularly with the remains, because yes, it says that the state will help out. I think that's the expression, they will help out.
Help out, okay.
But they will help out the families. But what this did is was actually installing a human rights outsourcing system in which the state transfers money.
Yeah.
Probably not anymore. We don't know with the new government, but because this is not established as a permanent public politics, but just what they were doing since 2006, just opening up a call for projects, and then some of them would be funded. But once the money is transferred, it's like you just do whatever with the money. I mean, just find your own technical teams and just organize your own stuff, which has been a disaster as a model. I think, so this is part of the other important things which in terms of yes, of course there is some symbolic reparation, but most of the associations said it was not symbolic enough. So it was shy of symbolism. So I don't know how to express it correctly. There was another important point in this, which is legal, and I don't know about the subtleties of it. But a lot of associations were asking for the declaration of illegality of the trials, of the traumatic trials in which people would be condemned to death. That was a very specific demand of the associations, and the state, just kind of said, well, they are illegitimate, but not illegal, which means that they are not legally cancelled, but they are considered unfair. So I mean, this kind of subtleties, which were kind of made the association freak out in the sense that they said, well, now you have this big majority in parliament, you can do this. I mean, this is the time to do it, and then you come out with this kind of trying to help, try to convince everybody, because not associations were not convinced, and this is the reason they went to Garzón. straight out, and that, and, you know, the process was different. But the right-wing parties in Spain also said that the law was a total disgrace. So, in this sense, I don't know to what extent it contributed to peace or cosmopolitan peace in terms that you were saying. And also, one other question about the term of the Holocaust. I mean, I think Preston is coming under a lot of fire in Spain because of the title of the book. Because I don't think that most of the relatives or associations related to victims of Francoism associate that much with the Holocaust. Sometimes, I mean, obviously, I think one of the important things in Spain is that this is happening 70 years after the fact, which sets us aside of other processes, and also which is taking place in the society of knowledge and information, which allows for some kind of conceptual hype. So some concept just spins off, you know, in the public debate, and then is absorbed, you know, by associations, and then everybody's talking about genocide, disappeared, Holocaust, and what not. So I think this is important also in terms of how cosmopolitan memories are being constructed and how things are coming here, because you were talking about the Argentinian way, and people here say, well, yes, but not so much. We had a speaker here a few weeks ago which said, you have expropriated our disappeared because they are ours. I mean, he was from Uruguay. And so, I mean, all this, you know, this movement, this conceptual, I mean, it's taking shape so fast, so late, and in a society which overloaded with information, which I think it's important to put it into this context. So, regarding the Holocaust, I mean, the relationship with Holocaust, you mentioned some of them, Zerbrunn, or the Amical de Mauthausen, the Mauthausen concentration camp, and basically Preston's book title, which has been considered by many just as a commercial kind of, because you mentioned this text by Paul Preston in the Unearthing Franco's Legacy book, and some other text by him.
Theories of extermination,
Theories of extermination and whatnot. But in his book, he doesn't conceptualize the Spanish Holocaust at all. It's just in the front page, which means that people get mad at it. I mean, we had a conference a few weeks ago, and some people would say, like, this is just a commercial strategy just to sell more books and whatnot, because it's not conceptualized within the book. So I think that the figure of the forced disappearances, and particularly crimes against humanity, are the roads in which Spanish memory politics is getting into the cosmopolitan things. Not so much the Holocaust. I mean, that is kind of
thank you also for your lecture. I have also a lot of questions, a lot of thinking to do. I think your lecture is very thought-provoking, and that's good. For example, about the Holocaust, I didn't read Preston's book, but I have read about the Civil War, and what strikes me about some aspect of the Civil War is that the executions against the Republicans or the prisoners of the Francoist side, in many cases was phrased in racial terms, in ethnic terms, or even in human terms, like saying that these people were less than human, didn't have the right to live because they were red, or they were just peasants or whatever, or Republicans. So that discourse was phrased in those terms, which is quite striking to me. So, well, that's one thing. The word in Spanish is exterminio rather than exterminación. At least in Spain we use exterminio, and it's usually the context of use of that word is for insects, for example.
For insects,
plagues, pests, for example. Exterminio of the flies, or you know. So, well, that's precisely the point I was trying to make before. That when you are exterminating, you know, insects or people less than human. Another thing is that besides the problem of the recovery of the remains of the victims, one problem I see for this particular project you are trying to not to propose but certainly to think about is that the perpetrators and the relatives of the perpetrators and the descendants of the perpetrators feel no remorse about what happened. So in other words, in order to establish like a moral community, as Hobbes or Locke, Montesquieu proposed, in order to establish a covenant, right, for a commonwealth, you need at least, if not a illegal equality, certainly moral equality. And how do you establish a moral equality if part of the community that you want to establish do not agree or do not abide by the same moral principles of the rest of the population about whom you want to establish that commonwealth? I see that the problem. That problem was overcome more or less during the transition and not satisfactory enough, and that's why, in my opinion, this memory politics movement started. It is true that that movement has a lot to do with the way the transition is now being reconceptualized. That's particularly the case. So there are much of the debate was not existing at the time in the late mid-70s. But the bottom reason is perhaps because the transition was based on a very weak weak foundations for that particularly moral pact or covenant for which to establish a democratic environment in Spain. I would say that.
Okay, thank you.
So maybe you can answer now and then go back to...
Yeah, I mean, thanks. Thank you for your comments. I mean, this is, it seems to be like, I mean, Spain entering Europe has to look around and find models, I assume. It looks to Latin America, it looks to historical models, and in Germany, of course, always looms very large, and it's not a very good model for transition, because Germany was defeated in war, and then it was like total capitulation. And I think that also, I mean, when you say that the descendants of the perpetrators feel no remorse, part of it is probably also, I mean, that and this again, if you compare it like to Eastern Europe and transitions to Eastern Europe, which were part of an internal revolution, I mean, Franco just died peacefully in his bed. I mean, there was, and that was the end of it, basically. So there was really no, I mean, there was no pink revolution and no green revolution and no yellow revolution. The man just died, and that was it. And the king has, as far as I've read, the king has decided, now let's go democratic in some way, or
it was more complicated.
Yeah, I'm sure it was more complicated. I'm sure it was more complicated than that. Yeah. But I mean, it is clear that
But this is also unjust to many people who did a lot of work against Francoism for many years. It is true that the dictator died in his bed.
Yes,
but it is also true that there was also a student movement, a worker movement, political movements against Francoism and war trades.
Yeah,
exile.
Exile.
And of course the exile, yes, no doubt. But on the other hand, I mean, there was in Germany, you had what you call like an Entnazifizierungsprozess, like a process of denazification, which worked a little bit, didn't really work, but there was like a process of, from the outside, imposed delegitimation of the former regime.
Yeah, but how long? How long?
Not very long.
Not very long.
Not very long.
Only for some years,
and then
it is over.
And then it was over, and then what you had in official speeches were crimes which were committed in Germany's name. That was the new formula. You know, it's like what is called the spaceship formula. 1933, like these brown people from out of space landed on Germany's earth, took it over, and in 1945 they disappeared again. And the crimes which were committed weren't committed by Germans or by Germany, but were crimes committed in Deutschland's Namen, as it was called, in Germany's name. So there was a kind of delegitimation of the Nazi regime, which was done by a lot of Nazis themselves. It's like this absurd situation. And of course, it is a completely absurd situation, but because what you had is, you had a regime change without a change of personnel.
Yeah, but this is the only, well, not the only, but this is the point that was very similar in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the Spanish transition was made by the Francoists,
Mm-hmm.
by people in parliament who decided to, we said at the moment, to make the anarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, the thing is then, why should the descendants of the Franco regime feel any remorse?
Why should?
Why have they lost the war? Were they defeated? I mean, if the transition was done partly by them themselves, why should they say, oh, we weren't actually, we were not good people? I mean, why would they do that?
I suppose in order to establish a foundation for the new covenant, so that democracy would be restored in Spain. I mean, they won the war, but certainly the war was started with a coup d'etat, a rebellion against a democratically elected government. Of course, we can then argue whether democracy is more legitimate a government than another one. But certainly there were a lot of atrocities in the side of the rebels, of the military rebels. So you know, if Franco was there and then there was a movement to restore some kind of democratically elected government, perhaps a republic or a constitutional monarchy, as it turned out, you need to establish like a body politic, yeah, like a new polis. It would be just fine, you know, if in the same way that the Republican side had been partly expunged from the memory, the political memory of contemporary Spain. The same will be true of the other side. And we saw both sides, you know, acknowledge that there was a war. Certainly there was a lot of regret about the war itself in a very abstract term, but not actually in terms of the reasons for the war and the atrocities committed during the war, except for the Republican side. So that didn't happen. And because it didn't happen, perhaps that's why people now are questioning the way the transition was made.
I'm sure that, I mean, after 35 years after the transition, these questions can be asked, but I don't know if there was any alternative in 1975, 76, and 77. If they could have taken a different path to transition, but these are mode questions. I mean,
this is a very difficult question.
And it's a very difficult question if there was another way. And I mean, returning to your point of that very influential book in Germany, the incapacity to mourn, that they wrote. I mean, there's this very short essay by Arendt published in 1951. Which takes up a lot of the arguments of the Michelists before that. It's called The Aftermath of Nazi Germany, that she published after her first visit to Germany, and every time she reports that every time she was speaking to Germans and they found out that she is a Jewish refugee from Germany before and now lives in New York, the first thing they were saying, yeah, but we suffered so much as well, and you know the Allied bombings, and she was talking a lot about not the mourning but the melancholy, and I mean the Michelists make this distinction between mourning and melancholy that is taken from Freud, of course, that you know Germans were exchanging picture cards from churches that did not exist anymore and were sort of like nostalgic about the life they were having before. And it is clear that the Germans, I think between 1945 and 1965, lived in a period of complete blackening out of what happened between 33 and 45. And this kind of incapacity to mourn, which is true. I mean, this is completely true. This kind of incapacity to mourn made them to what they have become later. You can really see that what Lübbe has called this communicative silence, this political silence, this kind of you don't talk about the past, and we all suffered. And I'm sure that in Spain you also have a kind of discourse where people look at the Civil War and said these were really crazy times and everybody was nuts. I mean, that exists, no, in Spanish discourse, that everybody was crazy, like this kind of fraternal crazy war, and they committed atrocities, and now let's just look to the future and put the past behind us, and let's win another European championship, and so on and so forth. I mean, I think these are extremely important processes. I mean, for somebody like me who looks at Spain from the outside, this looks like a completely successful transition to a thriving, wonderful democracy. I mean, the elections, this party gets elected and the other party gets elected, nobody is taking up arms, then the other side gets into the parliament, into ruling power. And I don't know how much it really looms here in Spanish discourse, how much like questions of money and debts and unemployment, and these are much more important issues than the remorse of the descendants of the perpetrators.
I think there is a very strong connection, because you wouldn't have that social inequality and political inequality that you had in the 70s. You wouldn't explain, for example, why certain bankers are living off with millions of euros in their pockets in the middle of a recession. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, the social structure and the political structure that existed in the 70s, which goes back to the 19th century actually, is the same as today, with a very fine detail.
Yeah, you had that in Germany too, when industrialists are sort of like, continue. I mean, like Mr. Boss's father was like providing the German army with uniforms, and his son and grandson are now doing wonderful T-shirts and suits for the public. But he could use his the infrastructure of his family's factories of clothing, which were cooperating with the Nazi regime, to build up his new empire. The same with Deutsche Bank, and you even have here in Madrid branches of the Deutsche Bank, which were banks which cooperated with the Nazis. You have that kind of transition. You have, so it's part of what you have. If you don't want to have a bloody revolution, where you kill the other side as retribution and revenge and put them into prisons and all that, then this is what you have to take into account. You have to take into account a certain incapacity to mourn. You have to take into account, and it's difficult to swallow. It's extremely difficult to swallow.
I think because we are putting things in black and white, and maybe there are other, like just trials, not just the revolution or the taking over of the Winter Palace. Maybe there are something in between. I don't know.
I'm sure that
people to try.
I'm sure, but then the question is, whom do you put on trial?
I would
you put in the trial a certain elite. You put in trial. I mean, look again. The Nuremberg trials, for instance. I mean, the Nuremberg trials. They put a small number on trials. Churchill didn't want the Nuremberg trials. He thought it would be a wonderful idea. You take 50,000 Germans from the political, cultural, and economic elite, put them against the wall, and shoot them. They have lost the war, you can do that. Stalin thought this is a great idea. Let's take 100,000 Germans and shoot them. And the Americans insisted that this is not the way to go. And we do some kinds of Nuremberg trials, which were mostly symbolic. I mean, how many people were like put in the trials and in the successor trials of the Nuremberg trials? I mean, if it's outrageous from a point of view of justice how many Nazi perpetrators were going free after the war. From a moral point of view, this is outrageous. I mean, from a personal point of view, I mean, probably the murderers of my grandparents, of my family, have lived a long and prosperous life in Germany after the war. This is outrageous. Again, one cannot forgive the people who have killed your grandparents. But from a political point of view, not from a moral point of view, from a political point of view, the American way of pushing Germany into a Western alliance to build up a West Germany which is closely connected to the West and is building up a democracy out of former Nazis is like, if you look at it politically, it was huge success. Huge success. And I'm sure that people here live in Spain and look at each other and say, how could you? How is it possible that people like you are still sitting on banks and sitting in places even though you have profited from the former regime and all that? But on the other hand, I'm sure that this might be the price people have paid, that Spain is now part of what it means to be a European. I mean, as Judd has described it, I mean...
Not the best time just to...
Okay, Tony Judd in his book, Post-War, when he writes about Spain, has this wonderful sentence, and has said, when you look at Spain, you can sense that geography has become destiny. Sort of like, and that Spain's destiny is a European destiny, with all the troubles involved in it, as the same as Greek's destiny is a European destiny. And what that means is that this politics of reconciliation and this politics of coming to terms with the past and making the compromises and being morally outraged about the compromise. If I would be the grandson of a Republican who had been killed in the killing fields by Francis, I would be outraged as well. I would sincerely be outraged. But as from a political point of view, I'm not sure that what has happened was such a bad thing, and I don't see really clear-cut alternatives. Maybe technicalities, trials here, trials there, public apologies, but in the large picture, I think that this has been quite a success story. But this is like the view from the outside. I'm a complete amateur. I don't know anything about Spain, and I can afford to say all these nonsensical things. And I'm sure I'm completely wrong, but this is like a little bit the impression I have.
Maria wanted to just to open up the discussion to other topics.
Other outsiders.
Other outsiders, yes.
I had a question about the Antigone metaphor story that you used, because the problem in Antigone is a problem of right away after Civil War,
yeah.
I think. So I was wondering how far Antigone can help us to think about Spain nowadays, where it is 75 years or so after the war, and also 30 years after transition to democracy.
Mm-hmm.
So is Antigone not more a story of more direct post-war, or
Yeah,
I was wondering why.
I'm sure it is, because I was quoting this article I read in the Unearthing book, where Rosina, where he says, I think he sits in an American university, no?
Stanford.
In Stanford, yeah. And he writes that the transition to democracy is a complete failure. I mean, he's very failure. Complete
but
failure.
he brings also a Catalonian perspective into it, which makes it different.
Right, and he writes from Stanford.
From
And he writes, it's a complete failure. It's basically the continuation of Frankism with different means. That's what he says, and that Spain is suffering from an Antigona complex, and that's why he writes about the exhumations as this countermeasurement against this basically this Frankist. He calls it the Frankist transition. It's a Frankist transition. It's like people were fooled to think that Spain has become a democracy. It's basically the rule of Franco with different means. And you may be right that this might be a Catalonian position more than a Stanford position.
No, you have to add that.
Yeah, of course. But again, I mean, the thing is that why I find Antigona so fascinating is because of the position of the forgotten figure Haimon that I sort of like try to unbury here as well. And Haimon is about yielding, about compromise, about giving in, and clearly I think now is the time. I mean, after 30 years after the transition, that both sides, I think, will be doing this. I mean, in a way, it will take another couple of years, and nobody will be around anymore from those period, and the descendants from both sides probably will be able to do that, as they have been able to do this in many countries of former Eastern Europe. And I think Eastern Europe is a much better model for Spain, could be a much better model for Spain, I think, than Germany, because also there's no defeat in war, there's no occupation, but there's a regime change from a very cruel regime, the attempt to come from like a regime of injustice. There it was not the regime of right wing, but it was a regime of the left wing. It might be very difficult maybe for leftists in Spain to see Eastern Europe as a model, because in Eastern Europe the left were the bad guys.
But there is also a very big difference.
Of course.
The Civil War. This is the difference between the Spanish case and the Eastern Europe case.
Yeah.
And probably there is no model at all.
No, there's no model. I mean, every country has its own thing. But what countries do, especially when they come into the European table, is that they need to adjust. They need to look at models, and they learn from each other. And this is why memory politics is not national anymore. It cannot be national anymore. It is completely influenced by human rights rhetoric, by Holocaust rhetoric, by transition to democracy in Eastern Europe. It's in a Spanish case much more than in other European countries, probably the Latin American cases, which play absolutely no role in Eastern Europe. People don't know about transition in Uruguay, in Argentina, and in Chile, but here people, because of the language and the cultural closeness, I guess, it's a much closer case. So what people do is they mix and match. They mix and match, and they constantly renegotiate history. And I mean, I mean, the thing is that you won't bring people you won't be able to impose your view of history on the other side. That won't fly without revolution and war. You can only enforce such a thing. If you do it without force, without violence, then what you have to yield to the other side in certain ways, if you like it or not. And this is where Haimon, I think, and the thing that's why Antigona is not only a question of the conflict between Creon and Antigona. And I think that the new generation probably here, young people in Spain, I think they will probably do that in the future, I assume, no?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No, because I think that the example of the replay is still valid, because even 75 years after, I still see between my friends whom are the fascist parents and whom had the other side parents. So I don't know if it's.
And does it play a role for you?
Yes.
If you're
well, I'm also a foreigner, so for me it's easy to hear.
Okay.
And I think that Spain is searching for the Haman figure in a way, and I think that the position of humbleness that has Haman, you also have it. And I also try to be like that in Spain because I'm a listener, I'm an observer. And maybe that also for you, I don't know. But in that way we can yield, and I think that when Spain can open up more to your solution, searching other methods in foreign countries, then maybe we can find the Haman figure. But I cannot see a Spanish person, not a scientist, being the Haman figure. I can't see it, really. You can see it in this very room, that everybody has an ideal of how it should be, and
there is the last president of the Republic, Manuel Azaña, wrote this drama, this play, just at the very end of the war, precisely calling for the kind of agreement that you are advocating. But again, he put as condition that both sides had to admit their faults. That's, to me, I mean, I am not calling for, a very bloody revolution, but just simply a consensus built on an acknowledgement of what happened, and that didn't happen. To me, that's the basis to create that moral community for which to then establish the Commonwealth that Locke particularly better than Hobbes was thinking about. That didn't happen, and I think that's still outstanding there. That's still to be made. And then there was this letter in the 40s by Alejandro Lerroux. Alejandro Lerroux was this political leader from the center-right in the Second Republic. He was the president of the Radical Party. He wrote a letter to Franco, precisely on those terms, and Franco refused to listen. So he was in the exile, Lerroux at the time. So you see that problem, that there is a lack of sitting together and then acknowledging things, and then from that point build something. Just not a historical discourse only, or a single historical, which is impossible. Simply a consensus and certain organization. That's still pending.
Yeah, but that's the arts of politics, I guess. Sharing a common political space without completely cancelling out your own identity.
That's in my opinion, that didn't fully happen in the 70s.
I also think, well, you've mentioned a few things that are very interesting. For example, what's the price that a society pays for a transition? And I think that it's coming down to a point where, with all these crises, this economic, financial crisis, kind of there is simultaneously there is like an institutional crisis taking place in which what we can see is like that the price of transition maybe is like a low democratic quality of Spanish institutions. I mean, there is a deterioration of institutional deterioration which is happening by the hour. It was, the monarchy was in trouble, 2 weeks ago. Now is the High Tribunal, because his president is resigning today. Now the president says, I'm not doing the national debate this year because there's nothing going on. So we just saw. I mean, there is a continuous deterioration of so maybe, and it's kind of like if the country is kind of, starting to fall apart. Yes, I mean, not completely, but I mean, it's leaking. There are leakages all over the place, no? And I think it also has to do with the transgenerational transmission of memory, trauma, and victimhood, or I mean, the ways in which this is really elaborated, and you've been talking about this, and has to do with the descendants, no? And also if you were a grandson of, because what these grandsons of the defeated think is like what is most important, but what's left behind are the bodies of these 150,000 people which were shot in the rear guards. No? And that's, so I don't know, I think that, because you tend to have a very positive view of transition to democracy in Spain, but I think that there is an emerging political culture which belongs to the youngsters, so the grandsons and granddaughters of defeat, basically, which is it has all the right, just to challenge, what was done in the 70s, and I think this is more or less what is happening today. As I don't know if this is a side effect of the exhumations, or the exhumations are a side effect of this political culture, and maybe they are nurturing each other. But now, also there is this idea of the two Spains, which is what you were talking about, the fratricidal Spain, like one Spain killing the other. Right? Like this was an ideology that was developed also in the 50s, which kind of in a sense it was like a political ideology which was starting to set out the ground to let Francoism go. Okay, we are bad. This was basically because during Francoism there was a whole political ideology which mixed up martyrdom with victimhood, and the fact that they don't have any remorse is because they have this feeling that they were victims of communism and of foreigners, which this is a caricature, but these things in families are saying that. We work with the politics of memory and talk with these people, and they are also exhuming whatnot, and they would tell us, after 40 years of dictatorship, of hailing and martyrdom and whatnot, they would tell us, we're afraid of talking, and it's like, give me a break. It's like what you think, you allow them to speak, but they also have this sense of having been victims, and which allow them to say, well, maybe there were some excesses, of course, in a war, who doesn't...
Shit happens in war.
Shit happens, but, we were victims, and we saved the country, and so that's still, is pretty alive, in Spanish society, I think, this kind of, well, it was just a comment.
But there's also this point about restitution, which is extremely interesting. Again, if you look at the German model, when they decided to pay in 51, it was an extremely controversial decision in Germany, as well as for the other side, for Israel and the Jewish organizations. And you could see it from the different terms which were used on both sides. In Germany, the term for restitution was called, with a very loaded German religious concept called Wiedergutmachung, which is like this Lutheran Protestant term, which can be loosely translated. It's this wonderful German thing where you have concepts combined into one word. Wiedergutmachung basically means to make good again, in one word, and it has religious undertones. And the Germans were paying Wiedergutmachung, but the side who received were not receiving Wiedergutmachung. They were receiving restitution and payments. This is the term how it was translated outside of Germany for the victims. So the victims were getting payments and restitutions, while the perpetrators were making good again. And both sides were living in this different universes at the time. Those who were paying and those who were receiving the payments. But at the same time, through these kinds of payments, what happened is that former victims and former perpetrators entered into a process of negotiation, which was like a process of negotiation which was very interesting, because it was almost like a market. How many years did you lose through the process of persecution? How much does it cost? How much does a left leg that you lost in the camps, how much money does it need to compensate for that? So, but through that kind of negotiation, they entered into a shared common space. And the question is if that could be possible, that even if both sides understand the process of restitution in a completely different way, and Germans who paid had absolutely no remorse. Had absolutely no remorse. I mean, so this is not connected. This is why it's very important in these matters to disconnect moral and personal sentiments with political and collective sentiments. There are different ways. When on a personal level you cannot forgive, on a political level you can do that, because political forgiveness and personal forgiveness are completely different things. And if you have that process here of money, compensation, symbolic restitution, and people enter into a process of negotiation, then they start sharing a common political space. I think this is the space where people can come together, even if they don't feel remorse, even if both sides think you deserved what your grandfather deserved to die, because he was a communist and he was like, doing that and that. But I'm willing to negotiate terms for the compensation of his remains or something like that. Even though I don't yield in that moment. I still think it was the right thing to kill him. But now, for the practice of a common shared space, I'm willing to negotiate terms. I think could you see that as a possibility? Could you see that as a possibility?
Well, we'll see it very soon.
Yeah.
We'll see it very soon, because the political...
And you will see how this will change, I think, how this will change the terms between people here in one generation.
There was this, 2 years ago, there was this TV actress who died. Her name is Emma Penella, 2 years ago, a very popular actress. It turned out that this was the daughter of the person who exposed and arrested Lorca in the 30s. And a journalist had with him a written statement by this guy through her daughter, and with the condition that that document should not be published until she died. Her father died in New York, I think 20 years ago. And that was a very nice statement about remorse, but with the condition that she wouldn't say anything until, the news wouldn't be reported until she died.
Okay.
So that's an advancement. Well, that was very unusual. That's a very unusual event. So if things like that start to happen, then we can get to something interesting, I would say. Yeah.
Oh,
can I ask something?
Yes, of course.
I'm here till Sunday morning.
But there are 2 soccer games.
Yes.
Oh yeah. I was just listening to the discussion about restitution, and I was thinking how these global metaphors or markers that people use to talk about, like Holocaust or maybe desaparecidos, or like these cosmopolitan metaphors, how do they play into that? Because there they refer to metaphors that are somehow evoking the idea of an accepted victim by everybody.
Yeah.
If you say the Holocaust, everybody recognizes who is the victim and who is the perpetrator. We see it as a very black and white thing. So if I want to compare Spain with the Holocaust, that's what I think that's what the play is.
Yeah.
That you try to find a comparison that activates that you are recognized as a victim without any question. So there, if you do that, you don't enter in this conversation of restitution. You don't enter in any conversation with the perpetrator, do you? I mean,
there's no need for it. There's no need for it. You do it on an institutional level. There's no need. There's no need for. I mean, what you had. There was this Israeli psychologist who did group therapy between children of Nazis and children of survivors, second generation. So a long time ago, he asked me once if I want participate. And I'm like, no way. I'm not want to talk to these people, not under these terms. But so there's no need for that direct encounter. There's no need for that. There's no need to turn politics into group dynamics. People don't have to sit together, hold hands, and cry, and show remorse. I don't think this is how politics needs to be played out. And this is also true when it comes to the Holocaust metaphor. I mean, when in Bilbao at the conference we talked about before, there was this woman from Chile who talked about the desaparecidos in Chile completely in terms of Holocaust victimhood. And I was wondering if these people, I mean, if people want to be remembered like that, as completely innocent victims also. This is like, and this is the big difference, of course, if Preston is using that as a market ploy or not. And the question, of course, is, if he's using it as a market ploy, why does it work as a market ploy? What is it about that term that he thinks can be used as a market ploy? If he uses it in order to sell books, then the question that we as sociologists or anthropologists need to ask, why does he think to use that term is selling his
publisher?
Or why does his publisher think? Why can it be used as a marketing ploy? It can only be used as a marketing ploy if it answers to a certain need of people to understand the Spanish Civil War in terms of Holocaust rhetoric. The same with the desaparecidos in Latin America. What it does, it takes away the politics, because in the moment you talk Holocaust, there's really no common political space that people themselves can share. This is what Arendt meant by the radical evil metaphor. And it also, I mean, these people were acting out of politics. They were persecuted politically. They were political actors. They were agents. They were not some innocent victims who were acted upon, who had no idea why they were basically arrested and exterminated. So, but there were people who made a conscious political choice, who were leftists and who had a political agenda. It does really it's an enormous injustice to the memory of their political actions to turn them into these kind of innocent Holocaust victims. But it works, and this is the interesting thing. I'm not interested in the motivation of why Preston calls this book like that. I'm interested in why do the publisher in England or in Spain think that this is a good marketing ploy, and there must be a reason for it. Like, why do people want to buy this book when it says El Holocausto Español, but they wouldn't buy the book if a new interpretation of the Civil War or something? You know,
well, that's a little food for thought for you, experts of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
In terms of Holocaust as a label,
yeah,
as a commercial label, almost.
Yeah, of course.
You know, how Holocaust has become, you know.
But you say he was here and he was attacked for it, no?
I mean, there are some people who think that his book. I mean, I've heard it in 3 or 4 conferences, so
yeah,
it's pretty general. You know, it's like I'm also interested in what you say, so I need more information to see how he got into that. But in the last 2 conferences, he was really criticized for that.
Interesting.
Which this is happening in Spain, but not outside of Spain, because he's getting these wonderful reviews.
Yeah, he's getting wonderful reviews for his book. Yeah.
But it's he comes with a Spanish thing, like he comes with this, and you get to the point which you say, don't we need like a new concept? Completely a new, fresh, just to talk about what happened in Spain in terms of borrowing parts of it and patching, you know, up, you know, different concepts that are out there in the transnational arena. So maybe it would have been more interesting just to come up with something which really, you know, differentiates the Spanish case and characterizes the Spanish case instead of borrowing, you know, from the rural market. This concept. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just,
But this is how memory politics is being conducted these
yeah,
days.
and it works with academia also.
Yeah, and it's like because it's the academics who are like also listening to all kinds of discourses and all that.
Okay,
All right.
so we are
Great.
running
Thank
out
you
of
so much for your attention.